The music you hear in the background is by our special guest, Lee Scott Howard of the band The British Invasion Years. Hey, Lee, how are you?
All right, Lee. I feel like I'm talking to myself for
Talking to yourself, me too.
Or, yeah, I'm doing great. How are you?
We're good so far, and to be expected in this time of the pandemic, as we call it. But as musicians, we have a tough time finding work and surviving in these troubled times. So I see you have a Mets uniform on, or that's good. The batting practice jersey?
Yeah, I think just a pullover that they used to use, I think in the 90s, early 2000s.
Right. Well, how about let's talk about your musical background first.
Okay.
How'd you get started in music?
Well, like a lot of guys my age and girls my age, they saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and that was a life changer and a game changer. I said, wow, that's great, and I want to do that. And it happened to come at a time where my sister had gotten a guitar for Christmas from her godmother, and she had full day school. I had half day kindergarten, so I would come home, and I just naturally levitated to the guitar.
Wow.
And so I used to break her strings, and she would break me into pieces. No, not really. But you know how siblings get. She was upset, and rightly so.
Right.
But I was the kind of kid, do you remember the Sears wish book that would show up on our doorstep around now?
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
All of my friends went right to all the sporting goods. I went to the musical instruments. It was just something about it that took me there. But I love sports just as much. So much so that my bedroom was lined with all sports memorabilia and posters and stuff, but I played music in that environment.
Okay.
From the time I was about 5. And the strange thing is, I was a painfully shy kid. So I locked myself in my room and nobody knew that I even played till I was about 16 or 17, other than my family. What I didn't know is in my 30s, my family are all sitting around the holiday table, and my sisters start to giggle about a story they were sharing. I'm like, what's up? They said, well, you never really knew this, but we all hung outside your door to listen to you play. And so did all our girlfriends. And I'm like, you didn't hook me up? So that was a funny little anecdote about that. But I guess I overcame my shyness as I moved into my 20s, as I broke out of my teens. And that was also a point where I let friends in to know that I was playing, and they hooked me up with musicians that actually got me on a path to being a full-time musician. And from that point, again, right out of high school, it was the late 70s, right when the punk new wave scene was hitting in New York City. It was a very vibrant music scene. We were more like a power pop band. And we wound up writing songs that were kind of catchy and gunned for recording contracts, and were managed by a guy who got us opening slots for a lot of national acts like Huey Lewis and the News, the Troggs.
The band?
The band was called Design, Design. And the whole idea was to be like fashion plates, almost like a Duran Duran,
right.
You know, gold microphones and dressed to the hilt, and you know, kind of very polished. And we had a lot of interest at labels, but we never got the brass ring with that particular lineup.
Right.
So at about 1984-85, the band broke up, and I was one of the principal songwriters, and I kept pushing on. And one of my friends happened to land a job at a recording studio that we used to work at of that particular band. And that recording studio, the producer worked on some movies for New Line Cinema when they first started out. Right. So he grabbed some of our music, and that wound up in some films.
Oh, great.
Which was a real nice feather in the cap.
Sure.
And in the meantime, my friend who was an assistant engineer took the train in every day, and he was having an argument with another one of our friends who was an assistant engineer about the music business. And the guy next to them taps him on the shoulder and says, I think I need to straighten you out because I'm in the business. And it turned out he was a guy from Jersey that worked for CBS Records.
Okay.
And so they got to talking, and those three became friends. So at that time, I know you'll appreciate this because it was the time when Bruce Springsteen recorded Nebraska on a 4-track cassette deck in his house.
Sure, right, yeah.
I had the very same one.
Okay.
And I started making what I call bedroom tapes of the music I was writing. And I was working out full instrumentation using a drum machine, and I learned to play bass on the fly and things like that. And my friend, I threw a cassette over him just to get a beat on what he thought of it. And then the next thing I know, I'm at work. At that time, I was working in administration for a Big 8 accounting firm. And I get a call in my office one day, and the guy says, "Hi, I'm so-and-so from Epic Records." And I thought this was a practical joke from my friends because they're all jokers. And I said, "Can I have your number and call you back?" And he gave me a New York number. So I hung up the phone, and as I was about to call him back, I get a call from my friend, and he goes, "Dude, our guy passed your tape unbeknownst to me through the label, and they want to talk to you." I'm like, "You got to be kidding me." So I called him back, and he goes, "Yeah." He goes, I got your tape here, and it says you did these in your bedroom." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, we're going to give you money to go do it for real. And if we like what we hear, we're going to give you a full-on album deal." And I was just over the moon.
Do you remember the guy's name?
Yes. The gentleman was Michael Kaplan.
Sure.
And he had just joined on with the label, and he ascended to be the president of Epic at one point.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, really, really great guy. We're still Facebook friends too.
Right.
And I always told him, I said, even though you passed on me ultimately, I never forgot what you did for me, and I'm forever in your debt.
Yeah, he worked actually with an old friend, the late Steve Popovich.
Yes, he did.
And Steve worked. Steve signed Michael Jackson. He also signed Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes.
Yeah, and at the time, I was tight with Kevin Cavanaugh.
Okay, sure.
And I, he was the first to call me up when he heard the news through the grapevine, and he goes, "Nice to hear from you, label mate. He goes, if you need me, I'll be there."
Yeah, right.
Okay. And he was the first musician friend to do that, and I took him up on the offer. So I wound up having a whole bunch of people. Him, Ray Anderson, who I'd known since the high school days.
Yeah, Ray's been a guest on our program.
Yes, he has. A longtime friend, which was great. And my old bandmates from Design jumped in. Mick Seeley. He was in Design.
Okay.
Design's first gig was at the Fast Lane in the summer of 1980, and we were opening for The Rest, which Mick was in with John Bon Jovi.
Right.
And they were breaking up that night because John was going off to do his own thing.
Oh, right. Yeah, sure.
And Mick loved our music, and he said, "You know what? I'm bandless. If you want me, I'm willing to join." And we said, "You're in," because we like what you're doing too.
Sure, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and we worked together, and he wound up moving on to go play with Southside and John Eddy. Trying to think who else. Ronnie Spector, I think. And Laura Branigan's brother, Billy.
Right.
You remember, he had a recording contract too.
Sure.
Yeah, and then he came around full circle, and he was part of the British Invasion years for 4 years.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I just
with Bobby Bandiera.
Yes, he did. And that was how I met Bobby.
Right. Okay.
And became friendly with him.
So we've got this big circle of friends.
Well, I always like to say it's semi-nepotistic in Asbury because everyone knows everyone and everybody helps everyone. You see that a lot.
Exactly.
Where a lead singer will go out and play at a venue and they're surrounded by a cadre of great Asbury musicians, and those same musicians call on everyone else when they need a hand, or if a band member can't make it.
Right, right.
Yeah. So that was my first.
My Music Saved Asbury Park shirt on today.
I love it. Yeah, and I remember those early days. Asbury was a real hellhole, for lack of a better term, and it was always like it broke my heart because you had the Pony, you had the Fast Lane, the Saint was on the other side of town.
Right.
So there was a music scene there, and it was identifiable on a world level because of people like Bruce and Southside.
Right. Sure.
And it was like, why I'm a Met fan. I was rooting for the underdog. I want to see Asbury come back, just like the Mets. You know, my dad said you always got to root for the underdog.
Sure.
So that way you appreciate the good stuff because you've been through all the bad.
Right.
And I carry that with me today and just about everything.
So tell us about the British invasion years.
Okay. Yeah. I was doing all this original music, and Ray Anderson started his own band in the late 80s after I was turned down by Epic. They said they liked it, but they said, we're going to pass. It just wasn't what they were looking for at that moment, which was fine. And it was right at the time I met who would ultimately become my first wife. So I ducked out of the business and went into the corporate sector because I wanted to be a present parent when we had kids.
Sure, right. Yeah.
But I still wrote, and I still played solo acoustic in clubs, which I still do today when we're off the road. And it was right about that time Ray Anderson formed a band called Ray Anderson and the Fire with cherry-picked people from the Asbury music scene too.
Right.
And also in the North Jersey scene and Central Jersey scene. And I met my buddy Bob Murdoch, who was the bass player in the band. And he and I hit it off. We both loved the Beatles. We both saw them on Sullivan. We both said, this is what we want to do. Our dads both even worked for public service back in the day. Okay. I mean, we had so much in common. And we hit it off. And I happened to move to North Brunswick from North Jersey right at that time, a mile away from his house. And we started writing. And I helped him put out a couple of releases. And we pitched songs to people like Roger Daltrey and others. And we're always very, very close, but never, ever got that little brass ring that we were looking for. But we always persisted. In the meantime, we started playing in a duo and then ultimately a trio. And one night we got stiffed on a duo gig, and we're sitting on his porch at 3 a.m. and we're like, there's got to be a better way. So we started kicking around ideas. One was a Beatle tribute. And I thought to myself, well, that's a pretty cool idea, but I'm really the only one in the band that has any resemblance to anyone in the Beatles.
Right, sure.
So we would need to have an angle, you know, and what I mean by that is just something that would draw people in. You're probably familiar with the Fab Four.
Right, sure. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Phenomenal studio musicians, right? From the Conan O'Brien show and the late night show at Letterman. And their whole thing is they don't intend to sound like the Beatles. Their intention is to recreate it like an orchestra recreates Beethoven, right, which is a really, really interesting take on it. And even, our Asbury Buds, the Weaklings, right? Right. They're like, we're not a Beatles cover band. We write songs that are influenced by the Beatles songs to the point where it's hard to discern which is which. And they kind of just took it down the road. What if they kept writing that kind of music? What would it kind of be like? Mm-hmm. You know? So as we're sitting there, the idea came to us, wait a minute, there's nobody doing the entire era and there's so much great music. So that was the germ of the idea of doing a British Invasion show. And while we did the research, we said, you know what, there's so much great music on the American side. How can we ignore that? So we decided to create a show that was a musical revolution where the British fired first, and we all know that they were all influenced by American blues and rock and roll.
Right, sure. Absolutely.
But that said, their interpretation of it was the first thing fired back with the Beatles. And then we fired back with, our take on all of this stuff. And it was such a fertile time. So we have one act of British, one act of American, and then we wrap it up with a Beatle finale, usually Abbey Road or something with Sgt. Pepper, maybe just a retrospective. But, you got to pay tribute to the guys who really kicked open the door.
Exactly. And you've traveled all over the country doing this.
Yeah, you know what? We've been at this for quite a long time. We hooked up with great management about a year and a half ago, right before COVID, of course.
Right.
And they are on a tear to get us up into theaters. Of course, now at a time when everybody is comfortable going back to the theaters, which is a wonderful thing because we are more of a show as opposed to just a straight up band per se. We have some multimedia and our thought is to entertain an audience rather than just play the music too. So that all ties in. But the bottom line is we're just doing what we love.
exactly. And you're lucky to
Yeah,
do that too.
absolutely. And you know what? Everything that happened during COVID, our dates have just been shifted. So the future looks bright. We just have to be patient and get from here to there. And I know
Right.
we will. And I know live music's going to come back.
Sure.
I'm not
Absolutely.
too worried about that after seeing in these outdoor venues over the summer just how much people really, really need music and rely on it.
Right. Exactly. All right. Let's talk about baseball. Did you
Yeah,
play as a
another thing
kid?
that we like is sports, right?
Sure. Did you play as a kid?
Yeah, I played everything. But as far as organized stuff, I was in junior league football. And one of the great things about junior league football is it's broken down into weight class so that, I wouldn't get torn apart by a guy 3 times my size.
Sure.
But think about a gangly kid who's going through puberty, an 85-pound stick
Right.
in 6th grade being teamed up with 85-pound and under 4th graders. I was in heaven.
Okay.
But once I got heavy enough and they're like, we're going to put you into heavyweights, I'm like, oh, I'm out. But I've always loved baseball. And even as a kid, my creative side would come out, and that too, in all sports, because the neighborhood kids would want to go to the park. And I'm like, no, I'm going to take care of this. And I would get light colored rocks or even like wallboard from scraps that people were, working on their houses and stuff. And I would actually make lines in the street and plates for the baseball diamond,
Right.
or the hash lines for football with end zones with logos. I had a blackboard that I turned into a scoreboard. I mean, I was all in.
Sure.
But it was that creative side of my brain at work. I even went to the point of, my team was the Mets. All the kids gave me T-shirts, and I went to the local stationery store and got permanent markers, and I drew shirts for them complete with pinstripes.
I did that myself as a kid too.
Yeah, of course,
I was a Yankee fan growing up because,
I don't hold that against you, Lee.
Yankee fan. So I drew the lines, the pinstripes, and I put number 16 on it because I was a Whitey Ford fan.
And he just passed, right?
Exactly. Yeah, unfortunately.
So sad. What a great player, though.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But, what happened was, when the Mets came around and I was a little leaguer, they had trips to well, it was actually the Polo Grounds first and then to stadium. So, we had a team in the American League and a team in the National League is what it was. Mm-hmm. And my grandfather was a great, great Mets fan, only because that he thought some of them actually were of Polish descent, like Ron Swoboda.
Right.
He thought, hey, Swoboda is definitely a Polak. So, I mean, my grandfather would listen to the games the away games on the radio at night when they really weren't on TV. But we had some great times with the Mets, and especially when, they won the World Series a few times.
Oh, yeah, 69. Yeah, that was –
so I
remember coming home from school, right?
Who was your favorite?
I was coming home from school, and it was an afternoon game.
That's right. That's right.
So I got to see the end of it.
So who was your favorite player as a Met?
Well, I really love Tom Seaver. I mean, he was the franchise.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, I think I liked him the most of all of them. And my sister had a giant crush on him, so she didn't have a problem with it either.
It was pretty funny when Phil Rizzuto and Seaver were in the broadcast booth doing Yankee games, and Rizzuto would just call him Seaver, wouldn't call him Tom or anything like that.
Yeah.
Great team. Especially they were also with Bill White at the time too. And,
Bill White.
There's a blooper that's on YouTube about Rizzuto introducing, and I'm Bill White. He's like, he's very funny. I don't know if you know Jack Scarangella. He's a great drummer.
I know who he is. Yeah.
Yep. And he was good friends with Phil and a whole bunch of Yankees. Nice. And he tells stories. In fact, I have a picture that he gave me of that he took with Phil Rizzuto that Phil had signed.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. My uncle worked at a car dealership in North Jersey, and Phil Rizzuto came in
Uh-huh.
For a promotional thing. And I didn't hear about it until afterwards when my uncle came over to the house, and he reached into his pocket and he handed me a signed ball from Phil Rizzuto.
My goodness.
Which was, I treasured that thing. And then what I wound up doing, because I'm a Met fan, and and I love Phil Rizzuto too. I mean, I was talking with Ray Anderson actually earlier today about the old commercials. The Money Store.
Yeah,
Remember his commercials?
Yeah.
Yeah, all these local commercials. It's great. But when my sister, my oldest sister, had kids, her middle son, was a real Yankee fanatic, and he was great at baseball. His son is actually great at baseball too. And I felt like, you know what? This is kind of a family heirloom. And I have a daughter that likes sports, but not particularly the Yankees or the Mets. She's just, she likes sports. So I thought, what better thing to do than to give it to a real diehard Yankee fan to covet for generations going forward, kind of thing. And he was just, he was about 9 years old at the time, and he was just over the moon for the longest time.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Danny Roselli from the Mylars was our guest a week ago, and he used to work in a gas station in Hillside where Phil Rizzuto used to get gas. And Phil would bring baseballs and stuff like that, give them to the people. I guess maybe he was assuming they were going to give him free gas.
Yeah. And Yogi lived up in Upper Montclair.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Not far from Telly Savalas.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. I grew up in Livingston, which was a couple towns over.
Right. Sure.
So we would venture into Verona to see relatives and whatnot. And my dad, like, one day decided, hey, we're going to take a ride. I'm going to show you some houses, which was the next town over, going up Bloomfield Avenue.
Right. Sure.
And yeah, it was kind of neat. A lot of baseball history in Jersey. My dad was a fastball, softball, like an underhanded softball player.
Sure. My father was too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd go to his games and stuff. And I swore I would have broken my hands every time I'd go out and have a catch with him, because he would decide he's going to keep in shape at my expense. And let me tell you, I still hear the of the ball. And it just made me think, I can't even imagine what it's like to be in a major league batter's box, having a ball coming at you even faster than that.
100 miles an hour, right?
Yeah.
I remember as a kid at one of my father's games, warming him up in the bullpen before he would go. And, he had these pitches I never even knew existed, like a riser and a drop and all sorts of stuff. And, it was amazing how those guys, I remember also, and these guys were really serious ball players, that they actually played, instead of a regular field with grass and dirt, they actually played in a playground once, all concrete, and the guys were still sliding.
Oh, and how did they catch the ball on such a hard surface too?
Right, exactly. It was amazing, the talent, first of all, and the dedication to the game.
Yeah, so true. Well, you know what? That could be said of a lot of things. Back in our day, this is the time when I begin to feel old and, wax about the past with my daughter. And yeah, you know what? That era, even in rock and roll and in baseball and in just about everything, it was all about the passion.
Yeah.
It really, really was. Like, I can tell you, I can't tell you how many athletes I met in our little town of Livingston, which was at that time, basically a farm town up the hill from Newark, where they would have grand openings and the players would be there and sign autographs until every kid got one.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to go in and pay for it. They did it. Now, understandably, the Mets were in last place. So they really couldn't command a big buck, but even the Yankee players came up too.
Always in their
the Yankees too.
They have to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you think about it, being in a band is a lot like being on a team. Everyone matters, and you got to play to everyone's strengths.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Lee, we're running out of time, unfortunately. We could talk for days about baseball. We've said that with every guest that comes on. I really
Totally could. Yeah.
appreciate you taking some time out today and spending some time with us today. Just talking
Thank you
about
for
baseball.
even asking me. I appreciate that so much.
Well, thank you very much. That's it for
Yeah.
today, folks. We'll see you all next week. Take care.